welcome into the Radioactive Paper Cuts podcast. I'm your host, Josh Kennedy. We are here to do an overview of The Witcher for our episodic TV reviews portion here we're going to be doing here on the podcast. Joining me today is Coach DeLong, my Marvel Stuff podcast co-host. How are you doing today?
I love when you get to be in charge of the podcast. It makes it a ton of fun to be the person waiting to respond. So I'm doing
Yeah,
super
isn't it
good.
great?
This is
I
kind of
thought
I love
about
it.
leading you into a joke, but I also was like, you know what? I already messed this up once. Hey, spoiler alert to everyone. This is
Yeah,
the
no, I
second
love it.
time we tried to record that intro. Anyway, we are in anticipation of the season 2 of The Witcher premiering on December 17th. So I thought it would be a good idea if we're going to review season 2 of a show, we should probably do an overview of season 1. And I could think of no one better to bring in than my loyal Marvel Stuff podcast co-host, Coach.
Yeah, well, I know when you said you wanted to do another podcast besides the Marvel stuff. Not only I was hurt. Obviously, I'm
Of
kidding,
course.
but I was like, hey, if we're doing nerd stuff, the one thing I want to make sure I get on is The Witcher. You have plenty of friends who know Star Wars and Star Treks and all the other nerd stuff. The Witcher is me. I love it, so I had to be part of it. I'm glad that you let me. I'm excited to
And
talk about
I
it.
am glad that you are helping me with it because you know a lot more about The Witcher than I do. I thoroughly enjoyed the show and I played the games a little bit. I never read the books, so I'm not that deep into this whole mythos, but it's a big deal. It's a big deal for Netflix, and people loved season 1. It was a big show, so I'm really excited to see what we're gonna do with season 2. But for right now, let's talk season 1, Coach.
Yeah, I like I said, I love it. It's super great. The entire mythos is great. Make sure you go back and play the games. If you can, read the books or watch some YouTube videos about the books or something. It gives a little bit extra to you. But the show does a really good job, even though it's confusing. And I know one of the first things we're going to have to do is try to explain what on earth is happening. Because if you don't know the idea of this timeline, which is convoluted, the whole show doesn't really make sense. But if you get past it, I promise you it's a show worth watching. Even my
Yeah, that
wife loves
actually
it.
Yeah, that took me by surprise, to be honest with you, because of it being so convoluted while it was coming out. I was kind of surprised people still held on to the show, even though I didn't mind it personally. I can really just publicly, a lot of people are like, once they can't really follow what's going on, they lose interest entirely, and then the show kind of bombs. But that was not the case with this one. It keeps the success going.
Well, you know why it works is it works because if you don't understand the plot, it's okay because you really are just so invested into the world building that's happening and the character building that's happening. You can't help but just want to learn more about the creatures and the world and these witches. And so, even if you don't understand the story that's happening around them, the show is just so well directed and paced that you're just sucked in, even if you don't know what's happening. So,
Yeah, I
what a
noticed
credit!
that while watching it myself. I just rewatched it this past week, season 1. I watched it while it was premiering, of course, but this is the first time I rewatched it knowing entirely what the timeline was, which made it way more fun to watch the
Oh
second
yes, yeah.
time. That no doubt about that. So if you haven't done that yet, go rewatch season 1 in anticipation of season 2 because still fantastic. Crazy that it didn't change since it premiered. But Henry Cavill, we have him to thank for everything.
Yes.
Let's just address that first because why not?
Yeah, what a cool story. The Superman himself, it loved The Witcher. I think he says he started in the games, which is probably a lot of people, including
A lot of people's
myself.
starting point. Yep.
Um, some of the best games that have ever been made. Great RPGs. If you love any sort of Skyrim and stuff like that, they're the games to go back to. If you love Dark Souls and that kind of combat, it's a little easier, but it's the same style. Got to go back. You'll love it. And he takes that love and he decides, I want to make a show of this.
Right.
And he had apparently done it for a while, trying to go from different place to different place, getting different studios. And once the reality set in that like Netflix was an avenue he could
Mm-hmm.
pursue, now he's Superman. Now he has a little more pull. He's got a little more producing power.
100%.
He goes back. He reads the books. He talks to some directors who have read the books, and he just steamrolls his way forward. Like, we're gonna make this show, and I'm gonna be Geralt, and it's gonna be awesome. And he does.
And He was right. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the Black Adam story with Dwayne the Rock Johnson because he's been pushing for that movie since like 2008. Except Henry Cavill somehow found a way to fast track something faster than Dwayne Johnson, who is arguably the most famous celebrity in the world, or at least close. So it's kind of funny that he was able to do that. But
Yeah, it might just
The
be that it's a
Witcher's awesome.
Netflix show versus, a DC
Yeah,
movie.
big movie. Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate it. I truly enjoy his iteration of Superman. I know some people are kind of off put by it, but I like him better than Brandon Routh. Not that he was bad, but he's better than him. Christopher Reeves. Those movies are a little old for me. Not saying that they're not good because they're definitely good, but having a modern day Superman is cool.
Yes, it is. It's cool. So I'm glad he has that. He has Mission Impossible. He has this. It gives me someone to tell people about to try to convince them to watch the show.
His
So
funniest
I love that.
role lately, he plays Sherlock Holmes in Enora,
And,
Elora, wait, Enora,
Enola Holmes.
Enola. Thank you, Enola
I
Holmes. I
know.
did watch it, and I was like, so Sherlock Holmes is just stupid ripped. I heard stories about him like literally being too buff for the outfits that they made for him, and he tore through them a couple times, which is that's so funny to think of Sherlock Holmes because when I think Sherlock Holmes, I think RDJ and of course Benedict Cumberbatch, and then I'm like, oh, so this mountain of a man is playing the same character.
Yeah, he might not fit quite the body type for Sherlock, but he definitely fits the body type for Geralt of Rivia.
Yeah,
So
no doubt. I think we should just start right there, honestly. Let's talk Geralt of Rivia. He's an awesome character. Done a little bit of research myself, but a big part of me wanting to do any sort of coverage on the Witchers, because I know you're a big Witcher nerd. I love podcasting with my buddy Coach. So why don't you tell me what is the most badass thing about Geralt? What makes him a cool character? All that good stuff.
yeah, so Geralt really he perfectly fits the trope of the last of a dying breed. You
Hmm.
think of westerns where you're the last cowboy before modern technology takes over, the last samurai, stuff like that. He's the final Witcher, not technically, but of a dying breed, and of course that
Hmm.
means you get to be the most badass one.
Have to be.
He starts this show as already a famous killer, as you'll hear him referred to as White Wolf often, and it's because he has done other cool things in the past that we don't necessarily get to see. But some of them are pretty sweet things. He
Which
kills a
is
lot of
funny because
monsters.
that's also a trope where a guy is
Yeah,
met like at near the mid or end of his career in doing something, and they're like, we're bringing him back in. I guess he's not quite the trope of a retired war vet or something coming in to fight off the Autobots or whatever. It's it's not quite to that point, but he has been at it for quite a while. And Witchers do not age the same as humans.
yeah, and it's important to know that he's been doing this for roughly 100 years or so. It's even vague, even in the books. But yeah, he's kind of in that stage of his life at the beginning of the show where he's just mindlessly doing what witchers do, which is hunt monsters. That's what they were bred for. Which the show doesn't really get into, but witchers were kind of created to kill monsters. That's all
Right.
he's kind of doing. He's mindlessly doing that until this show happens and forces him to grow and to accept his destiny, which is kind of what the whole idea of the Witcher mythos is. And the show even dives into it even more so than the books or games. It really hammers home that this is his
Yeah,
destiny.
he's just a really fun character, and the thing that's so great about him is he kind of seems to find himself in weird situations just randomly. Like I don't remember what episode it was where he just decides that he's going to fight off the Queen's Guard to save the Hedgehog Man. I know that's obviously not his name, but it's just these random acts that you're like, why is this happening? And you just kind of watch the events unfold.
Yeah, he's an absolute man. Like that again, that trope. I'm a man of honor. I have a code. I live by this code. It's what happens. Doesn't matter what's going on around me. I'm not here to play politics. I'm not here to make anybody feel better. Like I have a code. I do what's right, and I do what's right. Period. I'm not here to. If a monster is not a dangerous monster, I'm not going to kill it. If it is a dangerous monster, I will. And he lives pretty black and white, which is super cool. And I always love it. It makes
It makes it, yeah, it's
every
a
time I do it.
respectable characteristic. Just watching him make decisions on the fly, but sticking to his code. It's an important character trait that they hammer home quite a lot in this show, and I'm glad that they fully embraced that instead of playing wishy-washy with it like some shows choose to do.
Yeah, and because not only you get to start there, so you have a cool character like base of personality, then he
Mhm.
also does cool, dope shit. He fights with a sword. He
Yeah.
takes on monsters. He has like
He has like
what they
vague magic tricks kind of
is
with
yeah.
the force push type of deal. I know it's
Yeah,
not
they're
technical names,
called
but
they're called signs. They're the ability to do very very low level magic. You'll see the witches and the wizards can do really cool stuff. Um, Humans can't do anything, and then witchers have kind of found a little middle ground where I can do enough to like force push a person away. I could catch something on fire with my hands, but I can't like project fire.
right.
Um, so they get to do cool things like that. It looks cool when he does it. The show does like a really good job. Like if you think about how bad Avatar: The Last Airbender did
Oh yeah.
pushing air around,
Yeah.
this show on probably a much less budget does an incredible job of it. Not to say the show is a low budget because it seems to have a very
Yeah, I mean, season two's got a bigger budget. You already know that's a fact.
yeah.
They're like, oh, we can just print more money, putting Henry Cavill back with his gray wig, and it's awesome. But I think what we should do here is let's just talk about the overall character arc of Geralt. We'll do these one at a time through season one. How do we feel the character evolved?
Well, like Geralt has a single issue that he's dealing with.
Right.
He refuses to accept his destiny. He
Mm.
wants to live his life as just a grumpy old man that just kills monsters, and that's all he wants to do. And he unfortunately, as you'll see, it's actually like not to like episode 3, but
Right, where you see, but in the timeline of it all, we're gonna get into the timeline. Don't
yeah,
worry about
but
that.
he has a moment where he takes on a child of surprise, as the world calls it, and that's his destiny. He's locked into it now. This is like a child he's supposed to take care of, but he doesn't want to. And the entire show is him ignoring that responsibility and how it keeps biting him in the butt. The other thing that's happening is witchers aren't supposed to have feelings. They're
Yeah,
similar to
that's
like
something they made. It's like vague the rules on because he clearly has feelings
well,
for
think
Yennefer.
Spock. Like think Spock in Star Trek was like, he doesn't have any feelings. Well, then he does though all the time. So he's not supposed to have feelings, but he runs into this woman named Yennefer. So he's got those two things that he's kind of really dealing with. He's got his destiny, but he really just wants to be with this girl. But he also kind of wants to just be a jerk, and he's got to grow to just accept his destiny, which he kind of does by the end
In
of
the
season
in the
one.
final episode, he does embrace Cirilla, who we will talk about as a character as well. So he comes around. That's really the important thing about season one. And I'm curious what they're gonna do with his character in season two. If he's gonna stick with this grumpy trope. I mean, of course it's going to be a little bit because that's just his personality, but I think we're going to see him soften a bit just being around Cirilla all the time and potentially Yennefer, which we'll get to her storyline as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's anything like the games or the books, he's a great kind of dad figure. But like in that classic, I don't quite have to be a perfect dad because I'm not really dad.
Not the actual dad. Yeah.
So you get to swear and do all that kind of stuff as a dad. Not that I know that I swear or not, but it's such a perfect little trope that you get to do all the caring stuff as dad, but still get to be cool because you're not really dad.
You know what I'm just not picking up? Just to shout out our Marvel Stuff podcast. That's kind of what they're doing with Hawkeye right now.
It's very similar to what they're doing with
It's
Hawkeye.
like
Yeah.
PG-13 The Witcher is essentially what they're doing. Now, of course, The Witcher came first, so Hawkeye's ripping off them. I wonder if there's anything to that, how Cirilla and Kate Bishop are actually similar, but that's for some other nerd to discuss on a podcast. Now, wait, this is a
Yeah,
nerd podcast.
we
I
are
guess we
nerds.
could talk about this at some but let's talk about Cirilla. Her character arc, the lioness or the lioness cub of
The lion cub of Sintra.
there you go. That's what I was trying to say. And she's fun. I like her a lot. And she's an interesting character. She doesn't have to say too much for you to kind of root for her. So that's a fun character trait.
Yeah, so she's got a couple things going for her. Number one, she's a kid, so she kind
Right.
of has that whole rooting for a kid thing, but she still like kind of sticks up for herself and sneaks away from the palace that you see in the first episode, so she can go be among the commoners. So immediately, you kind of want to root for her because she's tough and she does the Arya Stark kind of stuff. But
Yeah, and
then,
that's another one. I thought about that as well. I'm like, this show, there's some similarities with a lot of different things I like, and Game of Thrones was very heavy because that's also a period piece set in a, I don't know, hypothetical world with dragons and such, classic medieval tales essentially, and they're similar in some aspects, but I wouldn't uh, put them together really. They're unique in their own way for sure.
yeah, that one's Game of Thrones is far more political. This one's, although the books are fairly political, but this show is not. But the other thing Siri has going for her, I like that you call her Cirilla. Is she called Cirilla the whole time in the show? I feel like I know
She's
her
called
as Siri.
Cirilla a handful of times. We could just call her Siri, of course. That was just
I don't
easier
know
to
what
remember.
she's called more in the show, to be fair, but I always think of her as Siri. The other thing Siri has going for her is that she has this vague, incredible amount of power.
Hmm.
Um, which, if you know anything, it's connected to some sort of weird elven blood from back in the beginning of time. Who knows how much they'll get into it, but it's cool that she just has essentially looks like she has more natural power than anybody else, which makes her a target for this weird, vague, evil army. So she spends most of the time running away. She gets to do a couple things on her own. I don't love her character arc, but it seems like you do. So you tell me why you love her so much. I'd be curious to know.
Maybe it's just because it reminds me of an Arya Stark, and I saw that storyline play out throughout that show, and I'm like, I think Ciri's going to go through a very similar arc and become just this little badass and someone that you really overall, like, she doesn't do a whole lot in this first season. She kind of walks from one place to another, getting in different situations, which is honestly what most Game of Thrones characters do. But
Yeah.
she's a fun watch, and again, I just like rooting for her. She's not, by far not my favorite character in the show, but I can't help but like her.
Yeah, and she has such an interesting thing because as we talk about the timeline later, her story of this show takes place over the course of like
So weird.
two and a
That's the
half
weirdest
days.
one. That's the weirdest one for sure.
Whereas like, you know, Geralt's story and this season literally takes place over like a course of 120 years or something. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And but it's really we're just seeing 2 days of her life. So she doesn't get to grow as much. But in terms of looking forward, I'm super excited about Siri.
Props to this writer of the show. Good God. Can you imagine how hard it would be to try and like not tell the audience, but tell the audience at the same time that it's taking place over the course of, like you said, a
Yes.
century for Geralt, but 2 days for Siri?
Super weird. Well, we have one person left to talk
Of
about,
course. Yes.
Jennifer
Yennefer.
of Vandenberg, whose storyline takes place over the course of 1,000 years,
That's
which
crazy.
is even another just super weird. But she's kind of the love interest of the show. But what's great about her is she has her own set of motivations,
Right.
her own set of like desires. Because at first she's this ugly hunchback witch who's being abused, and she
With
wants to.
elf blood, it was, am I remembering that correctly? It's some sort of magical creature that she has that
Yes.
running through
Yep.
her veins, which is what made her deformed.
Yeah, she's a little different than other just traditional witches, and she obviously, because she's one of the main characters, is blessed with more power and natural affinity and things like that.
Has to be.
Although the rules of power in The Witcher are very weird. Maybe we'll take a whole segment to talk about it. But her growth is interesting because it takes place over thousands of years. She kind of has two different little humps here. She has her whole like getting over it and becoming a wizard. I think takes place over the course of 2 to 3 episodes, maybe, where she like
She had
finally
that relationship
embraces.
with the other wizard type character. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but he was a fun one, and we get to see him again later in the story. But that was an odd storyline. I want to be honest with you, where how she just happened to teleport to a weird cave. It was interesting how they wrote that, but I mean it worked out just fine. But Yennefer, I don't know. She might be the coolest character of the show.
She's
She's got some
definitely
sweet powers.
dopest. Like just the sweet purple eyes is dope.
Oh yeah,
This like idea that she transformed into like this perfect, beautiful goddess thing is dope. And just of course her powers are awesome. She gets full on wizard powers, and like I said, her growth gets to do the whole. Gets to have two growths really. Essentially, she
hmm.
becomes, she accepts that she needs to do this and she wants to have all the power and she wants to be the most well known and respected witch in the land. So she gets to do that over the first few episodes, but then she gets to learn that that's not what she wanted It was kind
She
of
got
boring.
bored real quick.
Well, we
But
say
not
really quick,
actually
but
real quick,
actually,
but
like,
in the show development, it was quick.
yeah,
But
over the
over
course of
thousands of
hundreds.
years, you would get bored.
She gets kind of bored of that, and she realizes the one thing she wants is to have a kid. The one thing she can't have is a kid because she gave it up to be this powerful witch and to be beautiful. So now she has to like deal with not getting a chance to be a mother. Good thing for her, there's this sort of like weird lion cub of Sintra out there that may or may
That
not get to
could
fill that role at some
just
point.
so happen fill that role for her as well as Geralt, who they are a love interest. So it's almost like they built the fake family.
Yeah, almost like they
Crazy.
built it. It's weird how it's going to work out. But yeah, and then, like I said, throughout the show, she keeps like randomly bumping into Geralt. It all seems to be coincidental. It hints at that they try to do it on purpose throughout times, but the only time we ever see them together is purely happenstance.
Hmm.
And it's pretty good. It's pretty good chemistry. I like it. I think it's definitely one of the better little love interests going on TV right now. I'm excited.
Let's focus on one more thing that I think is super important, and that's Yennefer's school.
Yes, good point. So they're hanging out. They have a lot of wizardy stuff. Like I said, in those first 3 episodes, at Aretuza,
Aretuza. That sounds
Aretuza,
correct.
Aretuza. Yeah, I can't quite know how to say it, but it is cool. It's very cool world building. It reminds me of just how excited I was for the John Wick like hotel. You know, it's like this
Oh, the
cool
Continental.
continent. Yeah, so it's this cool, intriguing place um, that you wonder what's going on. It's a school for witches. Apparently, they have a separate school for wizards.
Yeah, I
Um,
was like, is this is
don't know.
like almost rated R Harry Potter? I don't really know what's going on here. It's not that similar, but it definitely makes that
Yeah,
correlation in people's heads.
it's harsh, but it sets up a lot of the world, and it teaches us the rules of magic,
Yep.
which are
You have to
vague,
sacrifice something
but
to make something else. Yeah.
exactly. Even if you're not a big Witcher person, you realize quickly that like all power comes from different things. Even someone like Yennefer can't just like power things through. She can't just be like, I'm more powerful and just, outdo
I mean,
things.
yeah. I mean, spoiler alert, she might be dead at the end of season one. Who
She might.
knows? We don't see her again.
Oh, she's not.
Yeah, she's
But
gonna be in that show.
this idea that you have to take life to create power, like they call it chaos magic, is what they call it.
Hmm.
Um, and
Shout
it's
out
kind of
Scarlet
cool.
Witch.
It's
No,
yeah,
completely
exactly.
different
Right.
chaos magic, but it's the same name, so that's funny.
But yeah, this idea is it's cool, and they have a whole weird politics to who gets to go to this school and not go to this school, and that kind of comes up as the corruption of the tower. It's built on this ancient magical ground, apparently on the bones of elves or something like that. That
That's
creates a
neat.
bunch of
Was that
power.
addressed in the show? I didn't know that.
It is, yeah.
I
The
guess I
guy
didn't
she's
catch
with
that.
mentions it. The guy that
Oh,
she's like
that's
hooking
right.
up with mentions that, because that's kind of his whole thing is he's like investigating the world before the world now. The
Yeah,
show,
he's an archaeologist, historian type of thing, but in the magic realm.
yeah, the show kind of like vaguely hits on this thing. They call it the conjunction of the spheres. And if you think of spheres, think back to Marvel. It's this idea of
The multiverse.
multiverses,
Right.
but they all kind of like at some point in the past they just kind of converge. They just hit, and now all of a sudden humans were where elves were, and elves were where humans were, and now the world is flooded with monsters and humans and all this stuff. And that's kind of that
That's
point is where the Tower of Artusa is kind of built. Um, Theoretically, I don't. But
that's one of the coolest things about this show or just this mythos in general is it's got such a rich history. We're talking multiple books, multiple games. There's so much IP to work off of, and they just get to pick from the best stuff. I noticed that while rewatching that they specifically picked really cool stories and had them take place over an episode or two for most of them. Obviously, series was over the course of 2 days, but even she had a couple of very epic adventures in that short period of time. When if we had started from scratch, we would have had to spend so much time building and we wouldn't have these fun stories to do episodes on. So I appreciate that we're taking an IP and just representing it to people as a whole.
oh, dude, the best part of this show for me, as someone whose fandom came from the games, is that there are episodes that are literally just ripped from the game. It's like this was a mission you played in the game. You
I
probably took
assumed
you
the
about
Golden Dragon was exactly that.
2.5 hours, and it just takes it out, and you just get to play it and then you just watch it on TV, is the same. The one with like the dad who like has a incest relationship with his sister, and now they had the daughter that was miscarriage, and it turns into that weird monster in the castle.
Yep,
Like
that was weird,
that's a
but
straight up a mission from the game. Except that like in the game you get to choose if you want to. You could just kill the monster. You could try to like revive it, and it's
yeah, but apparently, according to the show, if you help the monster, then you get to hook up with Yennefer. So
yeah,
that's pretty
which is
cool.
always super cool. That's another
Yeah,
interesting
that's a
part.
different story, man. It's all fun stuff.
It
Go ahead.
is, but yeah, that's I think that's the best part is that for Geralt, because that's who you play in the games. A lot of his little side stories along his journey are just side stories from the game, some of which were not in the books, because really the books focus on like this giant war and the creator Cirilla, which is really what we see with Yennefer. A lot of her story is actually the story of the books and the setting up of this war and in Nilfgaard versus the North and all these things. And so it's interesting that they get to kind of do the best of both worlds. They get to reference the books and the games at the same time, and they do it so well.
It does feel like a lot of side missions. Thank you for
It's
putting
exactly
that
that. I
to
love it.
words. That's exactly what it feels like. But let's get down to the nitty gritty here. I think we've got an overlay here that's going to be the timeline.
Yeah, we keep talking about the timeline.
We
Let's
need to talk
explain it
about
to
this
people.
and kind of do our best to explain it. So this is going to sit over our faces for a while. We'll break it down.
Yeah, I do want to point out to people two things. Number one, season 2 is not supposed to have a convoluted timeline. It's apparently supposed to be one direct.
I was gonna touch on that for sure. It kind of has to.
Yeah.
The likelihood of them doing exactly this, I think more than likely we're gonna see a couple maybe flashbacks to kind of do that, but there's no way we're doing these giant century jumping timelines and storytelling. It doesn't work.
Yeah, but somehow it does work in season 1. So if you guys,
Yes.
if you want to have the best way I could explain what's happening as the timeline as a basic is that, way back in the past, Yennefer lived her life, went to Aretuza, transformed, did all that stuff, and kind of, as her story is jumping on from such her story starts 1,000 years ago, moving forward. Geralt kind of starts 100 years ago, kind of moves forward at a little bit faster pace.
Right.
And Ciri's story starts 2 days ago and is moving at a much faster pace. And they all are moving and moving and moving, and they all collapse. And on the final episode, they come together, and now they're all caught up to each other.
Well, kind of. I mean, they're all in the same place at the very least. We don't actually see them meet up with Yennefer technically at the very end.
But the final battle that
Is-
she is partaking in,
Right, everyone's
is the
that.
battle that like Ciri hears in the background while she's meeting Geralt. So it's all happening at the same time. The timeline is now caught up to itself, and so now moving forward, we know that they can kind of.
Yeah, I like this.
Together.
I like this because it does have video game storyline things going on here. Like the fact that he just happens to come across the father of the family, well, the husband of the person that Ciri's staying with. That's classic video game
It's
things.
destiny. They're
It's
destined
destiny.
to be together,
Yes.
dude. She's her child. You can't fight destiny, which the show harps on a few different times.
Right.
One of the cities and countries, I guess you would call it, of this weird world, which is vaguely defined, very similar to like Lord of the Rings, where it's really just one continent that we know about. And is that the whole world? Is it not? It doesn't ever really say. But there's the one country. It's called Sintra, and kind of the queen goes down swinging because she is stubborn about.
Well, she does go down
feeling.
swinging, but in the very end, she goes out the window. That's that
Yeah,
was her ultimate decision, but it makes a lot of sense.
She wanted to fight destiny, and it doesn't work.
Right?
Destiny was always gonna.
I loved that line where she tried to give away a different blonde girl from Centra to Geralt, and then he caught on it, and then he called her out. He's like, "You call yourself a good mother, yet you were willing to take the child of someone else in place of Ciri." And I was like,
yeah,
man,
the Geralt
really good.
and the Lioness of Sintra is a very interesting little dynamic that goes on. Who we didn't mention though before we continue, we did mention Dandelion, or what's he called in the show? The the bard.
Oh, Javier. Oh
Mhm.
man,
That's-
it starts with a J. Good lord, go ahead.
But yeah, I know him as
You talk about
Dandelion,
him.
which is what you would know him in his book. But he's kind of the bard. It's very interesting how they do this idea that he has made Geralt famous by
Jaskier.
telling
That's what
stories.
it is.
Ah, yes, Jaskier. Yes,
Jaskier.
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 Yes,
Jaskier.
that's which is it's funny to me that they chose to name him that. He gets called Dandelion at the end. I don't remember, but it
Yeah,
is
we
this.
might as well talk about him. Why not? That's
If
fun. I
you
didn't
if
think of him
you
as a main character,
if
but
you
let's do it.
watch the show, you like a good hint that time is jumping a long time is Jaskier because in the bar and stuff, he'll be telling stories about what Geralt had done in previous episodes
Right.
as if they had happened 10 years ago. And you kind of you understand that he's telling these stories that have made Geralt famous throughout the lands, and that it's taking place over the course of time. Of course, Jaskier also doesn't seem to age, which is weird, but
Well, that's just due to the I don't know the actor, I guess, and them
yes,
filming a
the
show.
reality of
They could have
Phantom.
done some makeup stuff with it, but that's a good point. His stories they obviously caught on because it's referenced a few different times that people had heard the
Mhm.
ballads of Geralt the Rivia and how awesome he is when he defeated this monster, and that was all due to Jaskier's ballads, which they travel, but there's no way they could travel that fast. So that kind of gives you a hint on how much time has passed for sure.
Yeah. Toss a coin to your witcher.
Yeah, let's talk
Um,
about that
that
banger. They
what
gonna give him a spinoff just so he can sing stuff? That's I'm looking at you, Agatha, all along now.
it gets in my head, man. That song it gets in the dome, but it's clever and it's
Wow.
exactly right. It's you know that's what witchers are there for, to make money. But yeah, the timeline is interesting. It jumps around a lot, but as we said, it's really just Geralt going from weird side mission to weird side mission. But they do all sort of connect. If you
Right.
think about the genie episode, which is like episode 4,
That was a fun
it's
episode.
it's him trying to sleep, but he can't sleep because he ran away from his destiny, and then
Hmm.
it's kind of eating him. So they do connect, even though it's not apparent that first time you watch it. But everything is there for a reason, and that's kind of what makes this show so brilliant. Like you said, you have to watch it a second time
Hmm.
once you realize that they're like the timelines make sense, because then everything falls into place. You realize how clever everything was, and you kind of get to really appreciate
Yeah, what a
the
great
different
call
storylines
by
they're going.
Netflix. Do it that way so people have to rewatch your show, even though they just watched it.
Yeah, but what a gutsy call though, too, right? Like
Yeah, for sure.
definitely could have just bombed and been like, dude, this show's dumb. It doesn't make any sense. But they were like so confident in their actors and in their like set design that they knew people would just not be able to look away.
Yeah, one thing I want to hit on because it was odd in the show is the adversarial people. You know, like the bad magicians, I guess you could call them, the bad mages in this weird country that Yennefer was
Nilfgaard.
supposed to end up. Yeah, Yennefer was supposed to end up there, but then she
Mhm.
didn't obviously. And then one of her friends from Aretusa is now in charge over there, and they make this giant magic rebellion, and it gets focused on a little bit, but I don't know, man. I just don't understand the adversaries that much.
Is it worth me? Do you think it's worth me explaining more? I mean, it's not really mentioned in the show other than passing lines, but you would have to have an understanding of the books and stuff for it to make sense, which is sort of an issue, but I don't know how much you really need to know that this is a bad army other than it's a bad army. Um,
Yeah, it's easy enough, and I guess that does kind of just cause people to want to hop in and go ahead and read the books and find out more. They're cross promoting everything with this
yeah.
IP, and it's genius.
The only thing you really need to know, and that's mentioned in the show, and if you
Right.
wanted to pay attention, is this idea that, like you said, Yennefer didn't go to Nilfgaard because she wanted to go to a more prestigious place. The king who was at Nilfgaard got rebelled against, got put down, got the old murder shtick there. Some other,
Julius Caesar.
a bunch of random political stuff that we happens in real life. Someone rises, someone falls, someone rises. Eventually, a person comes in, kind of saves Nilfgaard's economy, and he is what they call the White Flame.
Right.
And he wants to take that, and he wants to, you know, use it to take over the North. but really he's just after Ciri, which I won't give away any spoilers as to why, because it doesn't say why, and I have a feeling it will in season 2. So no spoilers, but the show does say he's the White Flame. The White Flame is a person. I know it's vague what
Vague.
they
Yeah, it
mean
could
when
be
they
like
say
a
White Flame all the time.
magical
It's a person
thing.
we haven't met.
Right. Which is smart when you're going to have a main antagonist. It's it's gutsy to go ahead and just put it in season 2. It's like,
Yeah, the guy they
do we
have.
really have a face for the adversaries other than, I guess, the witch
The,
from Aretusa?
well, and like the
She's like
general
it.
that's leading them. The like,
Right.
there's the guy who's in charge of that army doing whatever he's doing. But he's just a general. He's leading the army, which is good.
Right. Yeah. Let's just talk about how easy it is to just get enveloped on wanting to know literally everything there is to know about this fantasy world. It's difficult to not want to just go down a
It's
rabbit hole.
that's why it's so good. That's why the show is so good. That's why, in my opinion, it's short of Lord of the Rings, but it's that next tier of just world
World
building.
building.
So much good stuff's going on. I think it falls short in the fact that it doesn't have enough monsters, doesn't have enough elves, and it doesn't have enough other things besides humans. I think it's its only thing that keeps it short of being as popular as Lord of the Rings would. But it's got every bit as much as this weird vague magic, and it's got this idea of the conjunction of the spheres, and it's all very deep cut stuff that you want to soak
You
in and
want to
learn.
know.
But it also, the stories, the books, the show, the game, it all takes place over the course of like one war. Again, very similar to Lord of the Rings, right? Most of the writing about Lord of the Rings only exists of the time period of the War of the Ring. That's the same thing here. So you're just like, you want to know about all the past and stuff, but it's all just hinted at and talked about and mentioned, and then you have to put the pieces together. So that's why I love the show, is you just want to keep putting things together. You want to keep learning about all the different adventures. You cannot wait to learn about the rest of the Witchers. The trailer talks a little bit about cool. They're going to Kaer Morhen, and you get to see more Witchers, and God, it's going to be sweet.
Yeah, and I mean, was there anything else that you really want to talk about with season 1? I mean, any other favorite things? I love the monsters, cool stuff. I'm glad that's part of the world, but I've said what I need to say about season 1. What else you got?
The only thing I would tell people is it's one of the shows that's obviously, like we already said, it's worth watching a second time now that if you have an understanding of the timeline a little bit. But it's a show worth sharing with people, because people are gonna just like watching Geralt do Geralt things. They're gonna like watching Yennefer do Yennefer things. It's a very well done show. I think anytime you have a fantasy show and you're afraid to show people, like, oh, I don't really know how much they like fantasy stuff. When something's well done,
I was just gonna say
like
that.
it.
You gotta acknowledge there's so many fantasy shows out there, especially after the success of Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, where everybody tried to do the same thing, and you can really, really tell which ones are actually well thought off and well thought up and well written, and they have this giant backstory. Because if you try and just throw us in a world, it doesn't really work that well. So The Witcher is just a prime example of how awesome these shows can be.
Yeah. Plus, it's got some, titties and stuff. People seem to like those,
Titties are cool. Yeah, no doubt.
People are a fan of naked women, and the person who plays Yennefer is super hot.
She's
the person
fine
who
with
plays Geralt of Rivia is super hot. Henry Cavill, big buff
Yeah,
guy.
why don't we have any full frontal nudity from that guy yet? I'm bummed.
I got to imagine it doesn't stack up to his big giant muscles. That's my own.
That's fair enough. The muscles are a lot cooler. That is a good point.
But yeah, wild stuff. But yeah, it's got a lot going on that is very much worth talking about. And season 2 is going to be wild. Hopefully, I'm going to be around to talk about it. Is it?
Oh yeah, that's my whole idea. Is we're gonna do very similar things to the Marvel Stuff podcast and do kind of a weekly review. I think we've talked about this before, but why not do it on camera? It's going to be awesome. Coach and I going to take on season 2. I'm curious how they're going to do the episodes, if it's going to be weekly releases or if we're going to get 2 or 3 to start. I don't really know how that's going to go, but we'll do the reviews just based on how they release it, and it's going to be awesome.
I hope I get a breakdown just every episode one at a time. Like we said, it's going to be in chronological order. It's not, gonna have a weird timeline and be confusing. So it's definitely worth getting into. It's gonna be a big show. I love it. I'm excited about it.
Yep, and that's all we gotta say, man. That was our review, our overview of season 1 of The Witcher. Thank you very much for listening in. If you haven't listened into us on the Marvel Stuff podcast, we drop every Monday at 8 a.m. I make sure of it. It's scheduled. It's awesome. Check it out. And earlier this week, our sometimes co-host Ray Kroitoff was on an episode of Radioactive Paper Cuts. So her interview is going to be up, or 2 days ago, with how this one's going to be dropping. So keep looking out for those. Love you guys listening in. Coach, any parting words for our friends?
Nope. Keep going on. Like I said, I'm a jack of all nerds when it comes to different kinds of things. Expand your horizons. If you're watching this and you're like, I like Witcher, hey, Marvel is great. It tells good stories. Good stories are what's important, not necessarily the medium in which they're told. So if you like Witcher, branch out. Branch out. That's what this show is for. This show is for branching out. So I'm glad you're doing it. And I hope that you guys just get to embrace the spirit of Radioactive Paper Cut and keep branching out your nerddom.
Yes, and that wraps it up perfectly. Thank you, Coach, for joining me. It was a
Thanks,
fun
buddy.
time. I hope to keep having you on here. And to the audience out there, you guys have a good one.
All right.